Hello everyone. This is now a long presentation and I'm hoping that by the end of it you'll have had some inspiration and have some new strategies and ideas to go back to your primaries and help support the young people that you work with to access as much of the primary curriculum as possible. So if you've got a piece of paper and a pen or your notes on your phone, and let's hope that you feel inspired. I've just looked at my email address and it's meant to be ajhowe@btconnect.com. If you have any particular questions or you want to email me and talk to me individually, you're welcome to. And this presentation can also be downloaded and shared with any of your primary workers who weren't able to listen tonight. So the title is Using the Source to Access All Areas. And hopefully that will be clear as we go along what I mean by that. So a 50-minute presentation, looking at some support that's available from the church's website. The majority of the presentation will be looking at hands-on strategies and ideas, practical solutions to some of your challenging problems. Some thoughts from parents and children in primary themselves, advice from some professionals and primary workers, a message from Dr. Krozek, some success stories, and then a spiritual lift at the end. Also, if as we're going through the presentation, you have some ideas that you think would be really useful to share with the whole group, there'll be a brief 5 minutes at the end for you to share any ideas that haven't been mentioned that you think would be useful for everyone. We'll then have the closing prayer, and then I'll remain on for any questions that anybody might want to ask me. So first, seek to understand, then to be understood. I love this quote by Stephen R. Covey in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, because it really relates to what we're looking at today. Understand the children and then seek for them to understand us. So the church, on the church's LDS website under resources, has quite a lot of support there available. There's a couple of pages that talk about how to help special needs children in primary, and there are also some videos and clips that that you can watch that show teachers in action helping the children. It talks about these 6 different areas of ways that you can help the children in primary, and also, as I say, gives practical demonstrations as well. There's also in many stakes a ward or a stake disability specialist, professionals in the community that you can access, and also use your ward councils to discuss the needs of the children that you have in your primary. Ask them for assistance and help where needed. Okay, so the main body of the presentation, these tried and tested strategies, but they come with a warning. They may or they may not work. What works one Sunday might not work another Sunday. What works for one of the autistic children in your primary might not work for another one. It requires patience and long suffering, inspiration, and a lot of love. And it's also important to note that trying these different strategies isn't at the expense of the other children in primary. A lot of the ideas that I'm going to go through are useful for all the children in primary and will hopefully make it a more positive experience for everyone. But if we compare a 4-year-old in your primary with a 9-year-old, you're going to see some similarities, but also a lot of differences too. So use those similarities to connect them, but adapt to the differences to empower them. Remembering that individualism is key. Understanding that is paramount to the success that you're going to have in primary. I once ran a support group for parents with autistic children, and our key phrase was, once you've met an autistic child, you've met one autistic child, because they're individuals. It's like a single man saying, I know what women are like, I've met one. So one of the key
Thanks for letting me come to your home, Harlan, and meet you here. I wanted to come because I've noticed that you haven't been in primary for
one of the key things to this presentation is the title, which is going to the source. And the source here is the individual, the child. What is it that's making them not want to attend primary or not access primary or not behave in a way that works for you in primary? This is my nephew, Harlan, and he's using his best acting skills to share a brief dialogue of what it might be like turning to the source to ask them how they're feeling about primary. So.
Thanks for letting me come to your home, Harlan, and meet you here. I wanted to come because I'd noticed that you haven't been in primary for a few weeks and wondered if there was a reason.
I found it a bit boring.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Is there something that you think that we could do that might make primary a little bit more interesting for you?
Maybe I could bring my phone.
That's an idea that I could think about. Do you have any other ideas?
No.
How about if I think about you using your phone in primary for a week and you think about other ideas that you could do, and then we could meet again next week and see if we can...
I think I could take this in.
Do you think that would help?
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
I wanted to just show that brief little video because sometimes we might be afraid to actually ask the child, what is the child going to suggest? And so I had my nephew suggest his phone. An older child might do that. And how you might be able to not say no, and give them the option to consider what else might be useful to you. So using the child's ideas to redirect and help them come up with an alternative strategy that might be more appropriate for primary. So these are some of the practical strategies that we're going to go through and talk about in how we can help the children in primary. So first of all, we've got go to the source, ask the child themselves. As I said, the little video, obviously if the child is verbal and if the child is old enough to be able to have that conversation. Second key one is discuss strategies with parents and carers. Now this is key. It's important that you use sensitivity when discussing a child's diagnosis, their needs or any unwanted behaviour, because parents may or may not be aware that their child's behaviour in primary is not as you would like it to be or is not as it is with as other children their age. And so this may be the first time that somebody has addressed this with them. So we need to be very sensitive. They may be in the early stages of getting a diagnosis for their child, and it may be a difficult topic for them. They may have feelings themselves about what the diagnosis may mean. And it may also be that their child doesn't have special needs, but that their behaviour just needs addressing and looking at. And again, parents are going to be very sensitive to what you may or may not be saying about their child when you go in and discuss things with them. The sensitivity is key, but try to absorb as much information from the parents or the carers as possible. Consider making notes and really have a genuine interest in what makes their child unique, and where appropriate, involve the child in the discussions. Ask about strategies that are used perhaps at home and at school that help the child. Get some key information from professionals that may already be involved with the child. Visit the child in their home. This is really important. You'll get an awful lot of information about the child's interests, how they function at home, how the parents manage any challenges, and just it sends a clear message to parents that you're interested and you care, and sends a message to the child that you're available, that you want to support and help them. And having you in their home environment is reassuring and comforting when they then come to primary, that you have been in their space and now they're coming into what may be considered by them your space. Get to know what makes them unique, and be sure to have real empathy for the parents, for the dilemma that they may have at this time. Some parents that I have spoken to have felt embarrassed by the challenges that their child creates. They have felt uncomfortable at the adaptations that have to be made for their child to access church. That they may feel more than comfortable and have no problem with as many people supporting and helping as possible, or they may feel that this is a family matter and it needs to remain within the family, and might not be comfortable about too much sharing of information. So have some empathy with where they're at. And along with that comes the no judgment. What works for your child? How can we help you and your child without judgments about their ideas and where they're at and what their child is doing? The parents may need you to be a voice for them. Some parents I spoke to felt that they would have liked the bishop to have offered support rather than them quietly suffering and feeling they couldn't ask for help, especially if they're in a branch that's maybe overstretched, or a big busy ward where they felt lost. So consider being an advocate for the parents as well as for the child. But again, the parents may feel they don't want to take resources away from the rest of the ward. But always involve the parents in the decisions that you're making. Ask them what they would like to see happen. Ask what their child's needs are and how they would like you to manage them within the primary setting. And discuss with the parents the child's needs for structure or no structure. Identify the particular challenges that you're having in primary so that you can talk specifically with the parents about what could help in that situation. And also be very aware of any sensory needs, food and drink challenges that the child may have, to be sure to discuss those with the parents as well. And observe the child's increased stress and anxiety so that you can discuss with the parents what seems to be the triggers for those in primary, when they're in primary, and so that you can respond to those needs appropriately, because you've had a really good discussion with the parents. So I know that's a lot of information on just the second one there, but those two are key. Talk to the child, if appropriate, talk to the parents. Third one, understand better the diagnosis if there is one. If you have a child that's diagnosed with autism or ADHD or any other challenges, if you spend a little bit of time doing some of your own research about what that diagnosis entails, although we need to make it individual to the child, just having some background knowledge is going to give you a little bit of support and help when you are addressing the child, understanding what it might mean to be autistic. Having flexibility in what class the child attends and whether they remain in primary rather than attending youth. This is important. Please consider holding children back in nursery if they're not ready for primary because of their needs, or consider them attending a younger class in primary if their mental capacity is significantly younger than their peers. And the same with when it comes time to leave and go to youth. If they're functioning as an 8-year-old, youth could be a very daunting experience. And if they were allowed to remain in primary for a few more years, they may be able to enjoy those last few years in primary because they can access it a little bit more. Consider a one-on-one support, an individual that's called to spend the entire primary time just with your special needs child, meeting their needs. Or consider calling a general support assistant for all of the children in primary with special or additional needs. You may have 2 or 3 that perhaps don't need one-on-one support, but they need some support and could share one person between a few of them. If there's space, have an empty classroom for that special needs assistant to be able to take children into who are struggling in the main body of the primary, a space that's safe for them to be able to go and use. Practice questions to ask a child during challenging situations. In the same way, a practiced approach to an autistic meltdown, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. Adapt a program to allow for time out in a safe space. So don't be, if we're too rigid with our primary meeting and structure, it doesn't allow for that flexibility to have time out for individuals or groups of individuals if necessary, which goes along with that flexible programming. If having singing time doesn't work for the majority of the children, then is there a possibility of switching it around at all? Is there a possibility of children accessing the quiet, empty room before singing and then coming and joining part way through the singing, if that's more appropriate for those children with needs? So just be flexible. Another idea is having a bell that symbolises a change of activity. Many autistic children struggle with change, but the bell can represent the familiarity. This is what's going to happen now. The bell rings, we then change activity. That can be reassuring and comforting. Have a simple, clear, familiar, repetitive routine, but still have that flexibility if necessary. If things change too often, too quickly, things are inconsistent, that can cause a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, and then you can have some unwanted behaviours. Allow for some colouring and drawing activities when a child is asked to focus. This can seem distracting and may feel like that's kind of not the way that you want the primary to run, but that might ward off, again, some unwanted activity. And the same with fidget toys. It brings comfort, familiarity, and helps with sensory issues. I know fidget toys are a discussion. It's difficult. You don't want to distract the other children, so consider carefully how you might use those. Another great activity to use in that empty classroom is an activity that you've got physical movement that's along with coordination and mental stimulation. This can be calming for individuals. It can also get out some of the fidgets. I had children that would come straight from Sacrament, straight into the empty classroom, and they would do practical activities for 5 to 10 minutes, and then they could join the main body of primary and be able to access the rest of the primary just from those 10 minutes of movement. Have your primary interactive with visual activities involving, props, pictures, and things that are visually stimulating for the children. I've got a little video here again of my nephew Harlan. This is just an example of how I would use fidget toys. If you've got a one-on-one with a child that's got ADHD or ADD or autistic, whatever the diagnosis, that if he can't sit still, this is a really good way of using fidget toys.
tells me that I can, and tells me that I can.
So it might be a case that you have a few of the child's favourite fidget toys that you have given clear instructions that they are to be used within the child's lap and that they are to be handed over when requested. And some practice of this is appropriate away from the main body of the primary, and so that they have a good understanding when I am in primary with all the other children and I'm required to sit and concentrate my one-to-one next to me with the fidget toys. I sit still. I can have the fidget toys as and when they are passed to me. And there may be a sound timer for how long that period of time lasts. Okay, other strategies. Consider training for teachers and those assisting. Some of the comments that I had were that people felt that they weren't given much information about the children in their class that had diagnosis, and so spent a few weeks managing their challenges inappropriately because they didn't understand. Don't punish, but apply natural consequences. So our language needs to be positive as opposed to negative. So rather than, if you don't sit still, then you will have to, be taken out, or I'll have to get your mum or your dad. But that there's natural consequences that are both positive and negative. So, for example, if you're able to concentrate during the next 10 minutes, then we will be able to go into the empty classroom and do bubble popping. So your negative, your positive language is, this is what you will be able to do as a reward for the positive behavior that I want to see. If a child is displaying negative behavior, the natural consequences again can be said positively. If we don't have the concentration that I know that you can do with your fidget toys, we're not going to be able to do the bubble popping, unfortunately. So just consider how you phrase things to the child. Ignore a number of unwanted behaviours. Again, understanding the child, having spoken to them individually, having spoken to their parents, you know what they will and won't be capable of doing. So ignore some unwanted behaviours that you know are perhaps beyond their ability to manage. Provide children with meaningful responsibility, whether it's being the usher that holds the doors open, stacking chairs, laying chairs out, collecting papers, handing out pencils, something that is meaningful. Holding up a picture at the front is great. That is an idea, and it's used a lot. But if you've got a special needs child that thrives on that kind of responsibility, see if there is something that is unique to them that they can do weekly for you. Break 20-minute activities into short 5-minute activities. And again, sound timers are great for this. So they can see if they're doing an activity that they're struggling with for whatever reason, they know it's only going to last 5 minutes and they're moving on. Be flexible enough to maybe change the seating layout from rows to circles in your primary, or semicircles, or anything else that works better for the children that you have. There's no need to be rigid in your thinking. Small circles with mixed abilities, mixed ages may work better than rows of children with children of the same age in each row. It's worth considering looking at. Sound timers, I've mentioned. Praise openly and signal unwanted behaviour discreetly. Often if you're the primary president, you're at the front of the class, you've got a front of primary, you've got a lot of children in front of you. It's difficult to not call out a child's name that's messing around near the back and ask them to sit down, be quiet, etc. If you've got an individual that is at the back that's maybe being disruptive regularly, you're using lots of strategies, but you do need the person at the front to have eyes on, consider a card system or smiley faces system where a lot of school teachers will have these, a red, yellow, green card at the front. You can make eye contact with the child that's being disruptive and point to the red card that you've had a discussion with and symbolises to them the behaviour that we're seeing is not the behaviour that we like. But at the same time as that, you need to also regularly get eye contact with that same individual and point to the green card, again, that you've discussed with them, that represents, I am so happy with the way that you are behaving in primary today. You're wonderful. We love you very much. And that discussion needs to have had before you use the cards or flags or smiley faces or whatever it is, so that you can just send a quick message to that child at the back if you need to. Another good idea is now and next cards. Now we're doing singing time. Next we're going into class, or whatever it is, those little 5-minute activities during sharing time as well. Now we're drawing, next we're going to be listening to a story. Keep your instructions short and clear. Verbal instructions, we do tend to overtalk often. Consider keeping them very short and very clear. You might want to allow comfort blankets or the toys, like we've said about the fidget toys. Sometimes a reassuring toy from home can allow an autistic child especially to be able to come to primary with some familiarity from home. Keep your classes small if possible. Obviously, these are all just tried and tested ideas that work for some and might not work for others. But if you do have the space in your building to keep your class sizes small, that will help the teacher as well as the students. Consider using hand signals to communicate if verbal instructions don't work. Pointing, kind of a sign language in terms of how you might put your finger on your lips or fold your arms, those kind of ideas. But create some hand signals that are specific to the child, that symbolize a particular behavior that you would like from them and that they understand. Set limits and boundaries. Limits and boundaries don't need to be all one-sided. What behaviors and understanding the child's limits are you prepared to have in primary? There do need to be safe boundaries. There are other children to think about. So you don't have to allow all kinds of behaviors just because the child has special needs. There needs to be some limits and some boundaries. Offer choices in a tricky situation. So would you like to access the fidget toys, or would you like to access the empty classroom? Would you like to do some drawing, or would you like to have some quiet time on a chair away from the other children? So that they know that they can choose what it is that they need to do to maybe calm down or change what's happening for them in their mind. Visual aid to indicate singing time and now lesson time and an outline of a routine. I've kind of mentioned this a little bit, like now and next cards and short segments. Make it visual so that they can see this is what's happening next. Acknowledge achievements, simple language. First we'll sing, then play a game, and acknowledge, well done, you enjoyed singing time, well done, you sang some of the songs, now we're going to play a game, good job, you managed to play the game. So that there are regular opportunities to acknowledge achievements that the child has done. Social stories and photos. These are great again for bringing home into the primary setting. So photos of the individual children on their primary door, this is where all of these faces come for lessons, and children can see who's not there today. The child can see who is there today from the photos and the individuals being in the classroom. And the social stories are about, if you're sharing a story, you know, the Saviour taught in parables. So the story of the Good Samaritan, the story of Jamel helping his baby brother Benjamin. And so you might have photos of Jamel at home in his house helping his baby brother, and that these are individuals in your class or in your primary, so that it's personal and it's relevant. And those kind of social stories can also teach appropriateness in primary. Sophia and Raquel always sit with their arms folded when they are ready for prayers, and here's photos of them and a little storyboard of this happening. And this makes it much more relevant, especially to autistic children who struggle with that kind of thing. Signs for sit, I need a break, home time, lesson time. Again, especially if an individual is not as verbal as some of the other children, if they can point, or they have little individual cards with pictures on of a drink, I need to get a drink, their parents, I need to see my parents, an empty classroom, I need to go and have some space, so that they can signal what their needs are without having to verbally communicate too much information. Stickers and rewards are great as well. Parents and the children themselves can tell you what kind of rewards work for them, and lots of praise. And again, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a sticker chart in the classroom. It can be a reward of the person that wipes the whiteboard down at the end of the class, or 2 minutes drawing on the whiteboard at the end of the lesson. That kind of a reward can be great for kids. An emotional check-in chart. Many teachers, again, in school might use these with children with emotional disorders. Pictures of faces in different colours that children can point to show whereabouts on their emotional chart they're at, whether they're raging red or mellow yellow. And so a big discussion doesn't need to take place, but they can signal to an adult, this is where I'm at the moment. Consider removing children that are sensitive to loud noises before singing time begins, or allow ear defenders to be worn. A lot of children have sensory issues, and singing time can just be too much to ask of them to attend, or they may want to be involved, but using earplugs or ear defenders, headphones, can help them to do that. You may consider allowing child to be in primary, but having calming music played through their earphones. So they're not actually listening to what the teachers are saying, but they're present physically. And the calming music allows them to be there, to watch their peers, to have some involvement. And that may be a starting point for them joining primary. Or even being able to have a device, you know, where they're watching calming videos on their phone or a tablet. Again, this has to be managed properly, a one-to-one to support that child doing that. Discussion with other primary children that may be sat with the child. This is how we're helping this child attend primary, and hopefully they will be able to attend without their devices in time. Repetition of important phrases is always useful. You know, whatever those phrases are that signify what you want from a child. So just a few information on some of those things that I've said. Children who have favourite colours or favourite toys, It might be useful to have the colouring book or the drawing book that you allow the child to use in that colour, a favourite toy that they only have during particular times during primary. They know this is comfort time. Or it might be the most difficult time for that child, like the lesson time perhaps. That's when they can have their comfort toy and their particularly colour drawing book that's got their favourite colour on. Yeah, hope some of those ideas and strategies are ones that you can consider using in your primary, or have maybe prompted ideas for you to use at home. Okay, so I spoke to quite a few parents of children who are currently attending primary or with recent memories of primary, with a diagnosis reflecting a broad range of special needs, including autism, global developmental delay, ADHD, executive functioning disorder, attachment disorder, and Tourette's syndrome. And I asked these parents what strategies were useful to them, what helped, and also what could teachers or leaders have done that would have been more effective. And this is some of the things that they had to say. This is Sammy Collinson, who was in primary himself. He is diagnosed with autism. He sometimes refers to primary school, but he means primary at church. This is what he wanted to share with you.
Hi, my name's Sam, and when I was in church many years ago, I did have some difficulties with church. When I was in sacrament, I would often find it quite difficult to like sit still, and I would often find it quite, I don't know, like boring, like listening to the talks, and I often find it hard to like listen and stuff. And often halfway through it, I'm often like taken out the room with my DVD players or my laptop just to keep me occupied. Or so according to Mum, when I was in primary school, I used to find it really hard to like sit still, basically. And also I don't know, for some reason I didn't like being away from my parents. I think it's because that they were like in the same building, but they were doing other things, not doing something else. So according to my mum, another thing I found difficult in church was apparently the how busy it was in there, and also like the noises, and I used to wear like ear defenders that me mum would bring in. Hello. Hi, my name's Sam.
Okay, so a couple of things that Sam mentioned there was he struggled being away from his parents. He needed ear defenders. He struggled with the amount of people that were in the ward, and also that he found church boring. Sam did not access mainstream school after the age of 7, but he did access primary. And he did wear his headphones. He did come out during singing time, and he did have a little DVD player that when things got too much, he was able to just go into a corner of the main primary room. He faced the wall because that was most comfortable for him, had his headphones on, and just watched a little bit of his DVD until he was ready to be able to join the rest of the primary again. It was a really, really big primary. There were probably about 60 children. It was a big ward. It was very hustly bustly, and it was a real challenge for him. And I think that being able to recognize his individual needs, for the primary to allow him to watch DVDs with his headphones on in a corner facing the wall, allowed him to be part of primary despite his autism. So these are some of the things that parents said. I wanted the primary leaders to understand they were not teaching a naughty child, but one whose brain did not work properly, making it harder for them to make sense of the world around them. Sitting still for long periods of time was difficult, so an adult would walk my child around outside to help regulate him. Teachers and leaders understanding that my son needed to have a different way of being taught. Despite his best efforts, he couldn't sit still with other children. He was extremely autistic. other comments were, my child was placed at the back because his tics were a distraction to other children, but he needed to be able to see what was going on to be engaged. This was really tricky. This child had quite big tics, which were funny for the other children and distracting to the other children. So by putting him at the back, that meant the whole of primary could look forward and focus, but it meant this individual would not engage, wouldn't give eye contact, would not concentrate, couldn't focus, because he needed to be on the front row to be able to see. So it's difficult. It's always a challenge, and it's trying to get that balance. In that situation, I would suggest that the child with the tics is on the front row, but perhaps to the side, and perhaps have some flexibility if the tics are particularly difficult or challenging that day. Consider moving him around with discussion with him first, so that it doesn't feel like it's a punishment or a consequence. And again, discussion with the parents. They weren't consulted, and I think that was part of their feeling that our child is treated differently. He's seen as a problem. Let's put him at the back. My son needed visual and physical lessons that were engaging. My son felt bad when he couldn't meet expectations. This is a little autistic boy who was intelligent, but not very verbally communicative. And so sometimes activities were not always accessible to him because he was seen as not as high functioning as he was. And so he didn't always get the instructions for what was supposed to happen. And so he didn't engage properly, and he felt bad then. He wanted to be just as the other children. He wanted to participate, but he was treated differently because the teachers and those working with him were not aware of just how high functioning he actually was, even though he wasn't very verbally communicative. Unstructured time was difficult, so another child was assigned to sit and colour or read with my child in another room. This is what they had to say about putting ideas into action. A card with a written structure as to what was happening next helped my child stay focused. Fidget box, but with each toy given to him one at a time, so there weren't too many choices and it wasn't overwhelming. Due to my child's limited social skills, it was hard for him to make friends. One especially chosen child a month to help him might have assisted him in developing his relationships. My child needs to feel welcomed and needs support entering primary. I also spoke to professional teachers and primary leaders, primary teachers, and these were some of the positive experiences that they wanted to share. This is what they had to say. Start with where the child is at. What are they able to do successfully, and where do we want to help get them to? Visit their home, create a bond with child and family, keep parents in the loop, have frequent communication. Find space for each child to thrive, not just survive. Every child needs a part to play and to feel special. Presidency and teachers should meet with parents, and we all have special needs. Minister to the one as the Saviour did. I just want to talk briefly about managing a difficult situation that you may come across with any child in primary, but especially with children with special needs. So you put the strategies into place, you've spoken to the child, you've spoken to the parents, you've tried lots of tried and tested ideas, but you still find yourself in a situation where a child is perhaps having an autistic meltdown. Don't panic and breathe, and that might take some practice. See if you can identify what the trigger was, because that may help you to stop the trigger, to stop the outburst, and to also prevent it in the future. Use agreed upon procedures previously discussed with parents and teachers. So these meltdowns happen, but if you've had a discussion with the child, with the parents, and with the adults working with them, this is what we're going to do should the need arise, and so everybody is clear what happens. Validate the child's feelings, but not the behaviour. I recognise that you're cross I recognize that you're frustrated, rather than, you know, I know you want to hit him, but you can't. Yeah, so again, practice. What are the words that you're going to say that can help that child depending on their communication abilities? Ask questions. What do you need me to do? How can I help? Do you need time out? What are your big feelings? Again, practice ones that are effective for the child that you're working with. Give clear instructions. Follow me. I can help you in a safer place. Or stop. Hitting hurts. Hold my hand and come with me. Again, these kind of things, if they've been discussed previously, so you know that it's at a level that's appropriate for that child. Then give them some time. It takes time to recover from information or sensory overload. So if you ask an autistic child particularly, come with me, give them time to process that command or that request, especially if they're not in a good place when you ask it of them. They may need you to just give them some time rather than repeating the phrase. Give them time to consider what the phrase is, what it means, and then how to do it. Calmly ask them if they're okay. But again, bear in mind, they might need more time to respond than you might expect if their head isn't where it should be. Make some space. Try to create a quiet space as best you can around that child in another room somewhere else. Ask for help. Have adults around you that have an understanding of the child and can come and be of assistance to you, and be in tune to receive inspiration. What does this child need right now? This is Dr. Kirsten Krozek. She has done a great video, but it is a lot longer than we have time for today. But if anybody wants to hear any more about the science behind some of these diagnoses, feel free to email me and I can send you the whole video.
My name is Kirsten Krozek, and I've been asked today to speak to you very briefly about special educational needs. I'm an educational and child psychologist, so work with children and young people and adults who have got a range of special educational needs. And these might be some terms or ideas that you might want to consider or be aware of in your So basically what autism is a difference in brain structure and the way that the brain responds to stimulus. And so people with autism don't necessarily respond to the world in the same way that what we call neurotypical people do. Neurotypical people tend to recognise and notice faces, and so when they're looking at, let's say, a television programme, they will focus their attention, their eyes on the face. Majority of information. Most people with autism tend to not do that because they don't discriminate faces as being one use. So basically what autism is a difference. So really important if you're working with children and young people with autism, that you're very clear about your facial expressions. And I would suggest that it might be really helpful to take some time looking at yourself in the mirror while you're speaking, to see how your face looks and try out different ways of speaking. So it might be that you try neutral faces in the mirror and see what that looks like and see if you can see why they might consider that to be more aggressive. Your facial expressions need to be exaggerated for children and young people with autism in order for them to be able to pick up on the subtle cues that they don't usually. And so essentially what ADHD looks like is challenges in being able to focus and maintain attention, difficulties in being able to shift attention. So people with ADHD can sometimes, if they're really interested in a subject, they can stay really engaged with it for very long periods of time. And so essentially what ADHD looks like is the behaviour is communicating and respond to that rather than responding to the behaviour itself. To consider what the behaviour is communicating. And so to empathise doesn't mean to collude. So we can still say, but you know, it's not okay to punch or hit. It's not okay to... So what can we do next time to try and help you to manage those big feelings more successfully? How can I help? What can we do together? Those sorts of statements, what can we do? How can I help? Will absolutely help with managing big emotional reactions, which of course is really important when we're trying to help young people to learn. I don't know about you. And so to empathise.
Okay, what Dr. Kirsten Krozek is trying to get across is understanding those diagnoses, as I've said before, is going to give you a little bit of an advantage when managing the behaviours that you may experience that are unwanted. So although I've tried to cram as much as I can into 1 hour, there's so much to be learnt and so much that's available out there on the internet as well. If you do know what the child's diagnosis is, do some research. And there are lots of little video clips out there where doctors, just like Kirsten, is explaining very briefly and in layman terms what having a diagnosis of autism or ADHD or global developmental delay might look like, might feel like, and how you might be able to better assist those children. And one example, as she said, was the autistic child not recognizing facial expressions. Often in primary, we may say to a child, "Look at me." An autistic child may be much better just looking over your shoulder, but not being particularly good with communication. They're not picking up on your facial expressions and they're not picking up on your words either, which is why those visual now and next cards, a clear structure, a routine, and all of those things are important. And that's why I said at the beginning, understanding the diagnosis will then help you adapt your primary to meet the individual child's needs. So some success stories. One individual shared this story. "My daughter's class teacher seemed to be natural in teaching and caring for Leah whilst in primary. She always had a toy for her to play with during opening exercises, held her hand when transitioning from the main room to the classroom, allowing colouring during class time, and giving the children a sweet treat during class. She was firm but always loving. Leah talks about Sister Cooper even now and remembers sitting with her in the primary rooms. I don't think Sister Cooper was chosen for Leah by the primary presidency, but Heavenly Father knew she needed her. Leah was included in everything and regularly encouraged to take her turn in music time, sharing time and lesson time. I remember the other children helping her do this as well as primary leaders. It was a safe place for her. Most times in the church, we want children to fit inside a nice primary box. When dealing with special needs children, we need to think outside the box. Thankfully, most of my primary memories with Leah are positive." This is a really interesting young person who had severe challenges, and it would have been a lot easier for her and her family and for primary if she hadn't been included. And yet a lot of effort was put into helping her attend primary. As she said, she had all the extras, the toys, the colouring, the food. She had a one-on-one. She had other children helping her. And yet it was still difficult for her at times, and parents needed to help her at times as well. And eventually she managed to get through primary and then access youth a little bit. And then lockdown has hit, and it's been difficult for her and for the family to make a decision that perhaps church right now is not the right place for Leah. And this is why we need to not make judgments. because we may want to include all the children in primary, have them access everything, get them all involved, but that might not be right at that time for that child or their family. So we need to be accommodating, need to be flexible, and need to not make any judgments. Leah was a big focus in that ward. Everybody knew Leah, everybody knew the difficulties that she and the family had. Everybody wanted to help, and sometimes good will and good gestures were welcomed, and sometimes it was too much. And I love what her parents said about Sister Cooper. When they spoke to me, they said they weren't sure whether a one-on-one would be helpful or useful. They weren't sure whether Sister Cooper and Leah would be a good fit, but Heavenly Father knew what he was doing when she was called. This is my sister-in-law, Louise Howe, and she's sharing a success story that she had when she was primary president.
I had a young boy in primary who was clearly on the autistic spectrum, and we were a newly called primary presidency, and we just watched him run under chairs, hide under tables, and just cause absolute chaos. We always had to, ask one of his parents to come and sit with him. And it's becoming quite challenging, actually, to feel like you're running a successful primary programme. We decided to visit all the children in their homes and try and find out more about them and get to know their families and see them in their home setting. It can tell you a lot about his child. We thought this child was non-verbal, actually, just wouldn't communicate with any of us. And we invited the children to do like a show and tell. This is me, this is what makes me special. So we invited this young man, he was one of the first ones to do this. And we weren't sure what to expect, but he arrived wearing his scout uniform and he brought in his pet chihuahua. And I remember him stood up in front of the primary group telling us about how he looked after his chihuahua. He was so proud of his badges and explained each one and what he had to do to get them. And I remember being so humbled that I'd misjudged him so much, and I just felt so proud of him. He obviously loved his home life and his school life and his hobby life, and it was just so great that he could celebrate that with us. And that did change. We got Bishop to give him an assignment to be our usher in primary. So we bought him the badge and he stood at the primary door and welcomed the children in. He might have just held a thumb up, didn't always give eye-to-eye contact, but tried to say hello. And that made him feel important and engaged and felt like he had a purpose each Sunday. So I'm not going to say his behaviour was perfect at all. We did have to invite his parents now and then to come and sit with him, but it changed dramatically. Because I think we saw his potential. He knew that we adored him. We knew each Sunday to ask how his scout group went, etc. And he felt he was needed in primary, so that really helped.
Okay, this is Kristen sharing an experience that she had as a primary president.
Hi, my name is Kristen, and I want to share my experience with you when I was called into a primary of a ward that was new to us. I wasn't aware that any of the children had special needs. And so my very first day in that primary, there was one boy who had a large toy with him. And I felt like toys were not needed in primary, that they could stay at home and would only be a distraction. And so I wanted to teach this young man to be reverent and to put those things away. So I had asked him to put it under his chair and he wouldn't do it. And I thought that he was really being quite stubborn about it. And so I was really determined to keep at it and keep encouraging him to participate, to put his toy away and to listen. By so doing, I added to the disruption of primary that day because I was so determined to have him put it away, and he was so determined not to. I later learned that he has special needs and that fidgeting with things actually helps him to listen better and to feel more calm. I was really humbled and also quite embarrassed that I had acted the way that I did and not realizing what he needed. I felt really bad. I took away from the whole primary that day because I was so determined to help this boy learn to be reverent. When really I could have added to the experience had I better understood his needs and how he best functions. It's really important to communicate with leaders and teachers about the needs of all the children and to have honest discussions with their guardians about needs and how to best address potentially difficult circumstances so that you can best serve those children and help them and their families have a positive learning experience, but also still help the other children in the primary as well.
I was really humbled by Kristen Williams's honesty about how her misunderstanding of an individual child led her to make some changes. And I think that's what, nothing more is required than that, is to do our best with the information that we have and be willing to learn and change. So in closing, ultimately, we're all volunteers with our own skill set to share. We need to be uniquely ourselves and ask for help. Your skills might be connecting with the one, or implementing new initiatives, teaching or being creative, motivating, or being the calm in the storm. I suggest that you rally the troops as a primary group together, put your talents on the table and then utilize them all. Serve the one, serve each other, and serve the Lord. So the spiritual lift, the best strategy out of everything that I've said today is to remain close enough to the Saviour to know what it feels like to hear his voice, so that you can listen and follow his promptings when they come. Ultimately, these are his children too, and he wants the best for them. To the world, you may be one person, but to one person, you are the world. I just want to close with a final experience that I had. Our Father in heaven loves us. He loves our children. One of my children is on the autistic spectrum. And when she was about 7 or 8, I was struggling to understand why all my strategies were not working. She was not responding, and I didn't understand why. And so, through prayerful consideration, I received a prompting that did not sit comfortably with me to begin with. And the prompting I received was that I needed to use my best acting skills, and I needed to overreact in all situations. I needed to show her that I was really angry when I was cross or angry. I needed to show her I was really happy and excited, or I was really pleased and really proud of her, because she was not picking up on any of my body language, my facial expressions, the tone of my voice. There was nothing. She wasn't gaining anything from what I was doing. None of my parenting was working because she wasn't picking up on, as I said, face, verbal, or body language. And so when I received that prompting and I started to change my parenting for this one child, so many things happened for the good. So many changes came about, and she made such progress so quickly. And I think if I hadn't have asked the Saviour, asked Heavenly Father for help, I wouldn't have known that. So ultimately, that's the best strategy. Go to the source, our Father in heaven, and ask him, what do these children in primary need? I hope that you've gained something from this hour. I've crammed as much as I possibly can in. Hope you've been inspired during this by something that's been said that has prompted you, and hopefully your primary children can reach their potential. We will have time now to share any of those ideas that have come to you. Just 5 minutes. If anybody wants to share anything, then we'll have the closing prayer, and then I will stay online for questions. Thanks, everyone.